Continuous improvement comes in lots of different flavors and styles. I'm Bella Engelbach, and I'm inviting you to journey with me to the edges of lean. Episode 89, Continuous Improvement with Games, with Alex Suchman. If you are a continuous improvement professional, you probably use some games in the training you deliver, maybe as an icebreaker or perhaps as a simulation to teach a tool. But have you ever wondered how far you can take game playing to build a team or create a culture? Alex Suchman has been literally playing around with games that create fun and meaningful learning experiences and has made a business out of it. Let's hear what she has to say about gaming in the workplace. Alex Suchman, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
I think this is going to be a great conversation because we're going to get to talk about gaming and games and how we can use that in the work that I think a lot of us are doing. But before we get into that, I'd love to learn more about you. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in Washington, D.C. with my husband and my beagle. I know you're a fellow beagle lover. And I started my career 20 years ago in public policy and public health. I like to think about solving big problems and loved the work that I was doing, but started to notice that when you're working in a place that's doing very important impact-driven work, often the inner workings of the company or the organization are kind of a mess. And I became really interested in that, in what are, what are the things that would make day-to-day life easier, feel less like you're on that hamster wheel. And what I noticed, a lot of it was very predictable and preventable stuff. There weren't processes in place, or people who were working together on things didn't know each other really well, so they weren't collaborating in the best way that they could. So I shifted my career to operations and organizational development to essentially try to fix the places that I was working and make them more functional and healthier and happier. About 6 years ago, I went out on my own as a consultant doing that work and doing mostly process improvements and helping my clients get more organized and strategic about how they were doing the work that they do. But what I became really obsessed with was this people aspect of, in these small groups of people where everybody is a lovely, smart person that cares a lot about what they do, little misunderstandings would still turn into these massive points of tension. And I could see it objectively as an outsider, but the people I was working with couldn't see it because they were, in the weeds every day. And I was thinking, what is a learning exercise that I could do that would essentially hold up a mirror to them, to how they act and interact with each other, and how their thoughts and feelings that make perfect sense to them might come out differently to other people. And around that time, I met a game developer who's now my business partner, and we started, no pun intended, playing around with the idea of creating game situations that mirror some of the dynamics that came up in real life, as a way to look objectively at how we think and feel and act in given situations and how we can better understand each other. And that sort of snowballed, and that's my work now. I have a company called Barometer XP that is using games and simulations to create fun and meaningful learning experiences for individuals and teams to get better at that interpersonal stuff that's just so important in today's workforce.
And that's so necessary, right? I mean, and we always talk about this on the Edges of Lean. We talk about all kinds of things, and it always comes back to people and people's interactions and how do we care for each other? What does respect for people really mean? But we don't. Well, I would say it's not that we don't get opportunities to practice that stuff, because we do as we're doing work, but the opportunities are not necessarily tailored, right? To things happen because they happen, right? And so you can learn and practice all kinds of things, but you don't have that many opportunities to intentionally
practice the kinds of things you're talking about. But I just want to take a quick step back and ask you a question about your business partner. When you say game developer, I mean, in my mind, that could be anything from someone who comes up with board games to someone who's really into making these, a massively multiplier RPG. So what kind of a game developer is your partner?
Yeah, that's such a good question because the word game means so many different things.
Yeah.
And that's something we encounter a lot. And in terms of our marketing and positioning, we wrestle with that. It's not a video game. It can be board games, but he thinks of it, he has an architecture and design background. So he thinks about it as designing experiences to get a certain outcome. So before we met, he had founded a nonprofit that worked a lot with foundations and with other nonprofits to create games that would educate about different issue areas. He has developed several scavenger hunts around the city that draw attention to mental health or literacy, that share different information and different clues along the experience. He worked with a microfinance firm to develop a board game about financial literacy. So it's using games to create an experience that's about something else, but the game is sort of the way to create a fun learning journey.
Wow. So not using a lot of technology, it sounds like but using space, using tables.
Yeah, I think the pandemic forced him and forced us to use more technology, but it's less about, I think so many computer games or video games are about that single experience. It's all about encouraging interactions among people. And so the game is just a setup to get people to interact in a different way and then reflect on that experience.
And in these games, are there winners and losers? Because I think that's the other thing with games. We think about winning a game. So is that part of the experience?
Sometimes.
Are they competitive?
They can be competitive. More often they're experiential. But sometimes it really helps to be competitive. Sometimes if that's what drives a team, let's say you're working with, if you're doing a session with the sales team, those are people that are very motivated by that idea of a win. And so building into that learning experience that they're trying to win, or beat other teams within their group is going to be really motivating for them. Whereas other people, like I myself, prefer more collaborative games. When there's a competitive element, it seems less fun because I just want to focus on having fun with the people around me and learning about them. So, but I think what is really beautiful about the game experience is it's a really safe way to put people in a situation that they're maybe not super comfortable with, because then they can look at what is it about this type of situation that makes me really comfortable. So for me, why is it that I feel less excited about a really competitive environment? Well, I feel like it takes away from just being together. It creates divisions but I know that about myself. And so I know, okay, I can play competitive games as long as I'm keeping it light and we're sort of making jokes and talking about other things and not getting too sucked into the weeds. But that's something I've learned about myself and can now apply that, not just when I'm playing games, but in other situations where I start to feel that pull of competitive energy.
So it's not just about the game then and what happens in the game. It's about the reflection that happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So tell me about that.
It's pretty fascinating how, as a facilitator, how little work you have to do to pull the insights out. People will notice, they'll say, oh, this game had a timer and I could hear or see the countdown clock, and that really stressed me out. And because of that, I couldn't fully engage in the game itself, in the scenario of the game. And then you say, oh, is that something that happens to you when there's a tight deadline at work? Yes, that's what happens. People often, when in our real work, we don't have a chance to look at our own behavior because the stakes are so high. We're trying to meet that deadline. We're trying to service a customer. We're trying to help a colleague or write something. There's all of these external pressures. When you're playing a game, it's just about the experience, and there's no consequences for the outcome of that experience. So the independent variable that you're looking at is the behavior. And so when people have a chance to look at it, they really appreciate it, and they're able to notice things in a different way. And especially with groups who've done maybe DISC or Strength Finder or Predictive Index, there's all those different types of assessments. If they're primed to understand certain behaviors and certain patterns, they will really see it in the game, and then they're excited to talk about it and to apply that knowledge in a new way.
That's great, because that was going to be my next question, was about assessment. How does this work with assessment? Because it sounds like in the game, excuse me, as you said, you start to see some of those behaviors or reactions coming out. And if you have some type of assessment before or after, you might gain even more understanding. And are there ways then in a game to practice how, once you have that understanding, how you might move forward from there? Like, you were talking about the person who finds the deadline stressful. How might you build that into a game experience to help them deal with that?
Yeah, so several of our games are games that you can play multiple times. In fact, we'll do that. A session might be, we're just going to play one game, but play several different rounds. And so one round we might give very vague instructions, and that lets people bring their own assumptions for what can happen in the game. And then we reflect on that. And usually in reflecting on it, people are like, oh, I wish I would have done this other thing. Or now that I understand this, if we played this again, I would do something differently. And it's like, great, let's do that. Let's talk about what are we going to do differently. We're going to do another round of this. So let's make some of our own rules. Let's make some of our own instructions, processes or cultures and shared assumptions. And then we try that, and people say, oh, well, this really worked. I think we need to add on this other thing. And it's just a really great way to practice that reflecting and iterating. But also, it's helpful to try it in other situations. So our ideal engagements with teams is to have multiple sessions over a series of weeks or months where we're playing different games. So, in this game, it might be you need a lot of strategic thinking and puzzle solving, and how do people act and what can they learn from that. But then the next time the game might be more quick thinking and physical and speed oriented, efficiency oriented. And so that's a different set of challenges. So how do those skills from the first game apply in this one, and what other strengths can shine through? So it's helpful to have groups go through very different types of games and see how they can lend their strengths and support each other across situations.
So you're really building on that learning experience. It's not just about playing the one game.
Yeah, a lot of it is building that self and situational awareness, and being able to do that in the moment and apply the lessons from it. So often we will say, oh, I did this thing and it didn't work. And you don't think about it anymore. Then it happens again. Oh, it's so annoying. This thing happened again. Oh, it happened again. Well, do something about it. That was really what drove me into operations and organizational development, was hearing my colleagues complaining about the same things over and over, but not thinking about, well, what could I do to prevent it from happening again? Or what could I do to mitigate the impact of this happening next time? And to me, I was like, something's broken. Let's just fix it.
Yeah, and there's lots of reasons why people don't do that. From fear of what management will say when the problem is pointed out, to deadlines that they have to meet, and in a lean environment that we want those mistakes, right? We want those problems, and we want people to call them out, and we want to help people through the problem solving, so that they, and the ideation and trying things, experimenting and coming up with the way to solve it. But most organizations are not like that, right? And
I think it's a culture thing. I mean, it's a culture thing to encourage people to acknowledge that something didn't go perfectly, and say, what could I do differently, or what could we do differently? And that has to come from, if you have a team that says we have a really open culture, we want people to share ideas, but every time somebody brings an idea or wants to talk about something that doesn't go well, leadership isn't responsive. Well, the culture is not really supporting that. And games give a really good way to try that. What's a way to do this that feels comfortable? What type of space is needed? Do people want to have that conversation in groups? Do they want to have it individually with their leaders? How do you put the process and structures in place to enable those conversations to happen?
Right. And so each game is like a little learning lab, right? So you can play the game, have a little bit of fun, hopefully, discuss it, think about, reflect on, and then as you say, then you might play the same game or a different game and learn something different. So then, Alex, how do people then connect that back to their work? What's the bringing it back to what's really happening in the workplace?
Yeah, the reflective piece at the after the play has two different parts. One is, let's look at this situation. What happened during that experience? What are the insights? And more often than not, people will say, I might say, I realized that when I asked this question, Bella misunderstood what I was asking, because to me, it made sense because I was using this language, but I understand that she thinks about things differently. So she needs to word it differently. And so in the reflections, I might say, I need to be more clear in how I'm phrasing questions or in what I'm suggesting. And so then it's, well, how does the same thing show up when you're working together, and what can you do differently? And most often the groups will make that transition themselves with little to no prompting. And then they're excited to talk about it. So often when teams do some sort of activity, it's very isolated and just for fun. And some people don't like that, or like, why are we doing this activity? Or I could be using my time for something better. But when you make clear that, no, this is to help you with something that's important to you, they're much more eager to engage. And then you've made this problem to them. You've made the connections very tangible and visible. So these problems that kept happening, it's now really clear why they're happening, and then what they can do to overcome it and prevent it from happening again. So people love engaging in that piece.
And then do people come back to you afterwards and say, hey, I had that happen in a meeting that I was in?
Yeah, we have groups that say, we realized a lot of the people in our group, when we present them with new information, they need a few minutes to process it internally. So we're now doing more to send information out ahead of time so people can read it before we come talk about it, because previously only certain people were engaging in the conversation, and the conversations weren't going really well, and it's hard to make decisions. So they've changed their process for how they present new information. Or people will say, we now have changed, so we work together in this way rather than this previous, we used to only communicate via Slack, but we realized that it's much easier if we have these conversations over Zoom or over the phone, because they're more nuanced. And so now we're not missing details or jumping to assumptions that are not correct.
And if you were to just say to people, as people often do, hey, well, if you're going to have that difficult conversation, maybe you need to see each other. They go, yeah, I'm too busy, and the Slack's right at my fingertips. So and the games are a great way to say show, don't tell. And so you're essentially creating this experience where a certain dynamic is going to happen, and then they see it and they experience it, and the emotions are real, even though it's just a game. It's not a real life problem, but it creates those same dynamics. It's really fascinating. So we were talking about dogs earlier, and as some of you can hear, there is a dog in the room right now. I was telling Alex, just recorded a podcast a couple of days ago, and the dog made an appearance, and she's back. So one of the things that I learned about in dog training was this idea of train for the situation, not in the situation. That is, if you're going to teach a dog something, and a great way to teach a dog something is to do it by playing a game, not to wait until the rabbit is running in front of you but to train and ingrain the habits long before the situation ever happens. And I'm always kind of fascinated, like, is there a similarity between people and dogs? I mean, we're learning more and more about dog cognition all the time, and I think we know something about human cognition. But is that really what you're doing? You're trying to train for the situation rather than in the situation. And
yeah, absolutely. I think especially when it comes to navigating uncertainty or dealing with change or dealing with conflict or giving feedback, those are all, we probably experience each one of those every day in our professional lives, but they're profoundly uncomfortable a lot of the time. So by practicing it and by seeing what do different individuals need, what are their thoughts and feelings and behaviors in a situation, and how does that tell you about what they like or what they don't like, or what they're good at, what makes them feel insecure, will let you come up with a strategy for dealing with those types of situations in the future. And so practicing it, understanding yourself and other people more, and then saying, okay, if we're under a really tight deadline, this is the way that we should go about approaching it, because it will make everybody feel more supported. It'll take some of the stress out. It'll add some certainty and stability to the situation. So yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah. So can you describe one of your games to us?
Yeah. One of my favorite games is incredibly simple. It's called Visionary. And you can play this in person or virtually. And you have one person takes on the role of the visionary, and that person is looking at a picture on a computer. And we use very silly, goofy pictures. And their teammates have to draw the picture either with markers on a whiteboard or a big flip chart paper, or using Zoom annotate tools that let them draw on a screen. They're working together to draw the picture only based on the visionary's description. And there's different rules we can put in place. Can the drawers ask the visionary questions, or is it only one-way communication? What's the time limit? Are there certain words the visionary can or can't say? So you can make the situation higher pressure or lower pressure depending on those rules. But there are so many different dynamics that come out in that very simple game. From the first level is the visionary. What details do they think are most important to convey about the picture? Some create a story. They say, okay, imagine that you're a bird and you're flying and what you see in front of you. Some people will go right into, okay, the bottom half of the screen is green and it looks like a farm. And so just what details are most salient and how do people explain it? And then for the listeners, for the drawers, what information do they need to hear to feel like they can start taking action? That says a lot about psychological safety. We've gone through this where, after the 2 or 3 minute timer, the screen is still blank because nobody feels like they can make the first move, or no one wants to look stupid or make a mistake or be judged by other people. So no one does that. And it's like, okay, well, how come? What were people thinking? What were you feeling? Why did nobody start drawing? But it also gets into when people have to work together on something, do you need specific tasks delegated to you, or can you self-organize? Because there's a timer that's visible on the screen, or you can hear a countdown timer if you're in the room, is that making people anxious? Are people spending more time worrying about meeting the deadline than accomplishing the goal? There's just so many different things that come out, and it leads to really great conversation. And it's a really great game. It's easy to iterate because you can just have another round where somebody else gets to be the visionary and the person who was the visionary before gets to draw. Another variation that we'll do with bigger groups is we'll have one visionary, but several groups drawing the same image, but they can't see what each other are drawing. Excuse me. And so you'll just see how people hear the exact same words and produce
And
a very different image. It's an incredibly powerful activity that's so simple.
And that's so, I mean, think about, the CEO who's sitting there saying, well, I gave everybody what my, the one true north for the organization, and nobody is following it, right? That game would absolutely help. So there's a game that's often played by lean practitioners called Standard Pig, which is I think a variation of the same game. So there's a pig that's drawn on a grid, and one person has to describe to other people how to draw the pig. But I think the difference, when it always, what you end up with may or may not look like a pig. But I think the difference with playing Standard Pig, Lisa, as I've experienced it, and what you're talking about, is the quality of the conversation and the iteration, right? And then lean, you know what, folks, those of you who are listening, we're all about iteration. We should be doing this more than once. If you're playing Standard Pig, I think, just to show people that directions given by a leader can easily be misinterpreted, or what you see is not what other people see, playing it once, that's great. But how much more could you get out of, another 15 minutes of Standard Pig? So,
yeah, well, and that idea of what you see, but to other people see, when somebody has an idea and that idea turns into a project that a group is doing, it's really clear in that one person's head, all of these little details, because they thought everything through. But telling somebody something once and probably only sharing a summary of all of those thoughts that you've had in the ideation phase, they don't have that full picture. And we forget that all the time. I mean, my husband, a joke that I always have with him, we'll be having a conversation, and then 30 seconds later, he brings up something totally different. And I'm like, where did that come from? He's like, oh, my thought process was, we were talking about this and it made me think about this. And then it reminded me of this, and I wanted to ask you this. To him, it's a really logical path to get from conversation A to conversation B. To me, we can go from talking about dinner to, where are we going next weekend with our friends for dinner? Totally different, unrelated.
Still talking about dinner.
So I guess maybe I'm hungry, but it could be totally unrelated conversations, and
right.
And they just make perfect sense to him because it's in his head, and he's making the connections.
And that's such an important insight for all of us. And I know I'm learning more and more about it. Not just in terms of, things like, the kind of typical business assessments that we do. You talk about DISC, people do the MBTI, those kinds of things, but just knowing that there's going to be so many people that you run into from day to day whose brain does not work like yours, right? And maybe you're neurotypical and the person that you're working with is ADHD. And there's different types of ADHD. Maybe there's somewhere on the autism spectrum. Maybe, the way that their brain, which is unique and is going to bring so much to your team, is going to be different. And so they're going to see things differently, hear things differently, and attend to things differently, and focus on things differently, right? We're all different, which is great, right? Right.
Yeah, and I think there's so much conversation now about diversity and inclusivity, equity, which is really important, but there's so many different types of diversity. And we have a couple other activities that emphasize this, of just who are people that think really in the weeds, that like to be in the details, versus who are the people that think more big picture and creatively. And those are huge differences in how you see the world and what motivates you and what information you think is most important. And that's often one of the characteristics that can cause real tension and disagreement and animosity in the workplace. If this one person's always asking these really tedious questions, and the big picture thinker says they're missing the point, it's really about this, but they're not missing the point. They're just looking through totally different lenses at the same problem. They want the same outcome, but they're just focusing on different aspects of it. And the more we can understand that and take that into consideration in how we communicate and the actions that we take and the way we respond to questions and needs of other people, the better the outcome it's going to be for everybody.
So if you were starting a new team, I'm sure you've been involved with this in your work. If you were starting a new team, is this how you would start? You start with some games?
a lot of times we'll start with a game. We have what we call our pressure assessment, and it's a really quick survey to take that has people rank different statements about different aspects of their team culture and their team dynamics. And it maybe takes 2 minutes to fill out. And from it, we can see, do people see that their teams have this, do they see their team's strengths or pain points the same way, or is it really different? And it gives us a really good snapshot of how to dive in, of where there's alignment, where there's not alignment, what are the priorities, what are the strengths of this group, and what are the challenges of this group. And if it's a group that's been going through something really difficult, maybe they just had a lot of turnover, or maybe there's been some crisis in the organization, they're coming out of it, we might want to start with a game that's celebrating their strengths and letting them feel really good about all the things they have accomplished and the different skills that they have, before we would dive into looking at some of the differences and exploring those. So it just gives us this really tiny assessment, gives us a really rich picture of what are some of the things bubbling under the surface, and how do we get this team to show up to our engagements in an engaged and open and excited to learn mindset.
Right, because you don't want to, as you said before, a lot of them are probably coming and saying, well, I have work I got to do. Why should I come and do this? But it may be the most important thing that they do in their entire week, because it will help them do all the work better.
Yeah, and right now you're hearing so many companies talk about, we want to address our culture, but they're not investing money or time into it. So it's not magic. You can't just say, I want everybody to feel psychologically safe and to be able to share ideas and feel comfortable giving and receiving feedback, but then not do anything to help them accomplish that, or not model how that's supposed to happen. And it's not going to happen unless there is some dedicated time and resources for it.
When you're doing this with a group or in an organization, is leadership usually involved?
Yeah. And it's really, in fact, if a group approaches us, if it's a leader and they say, oh, my team needs all of this and this, they're the problem, we probably wouldn't take them on as a client, because you can't, unless the leader is willing to look in that mirror as well. It's not going to change. And some of the most powerful sessions we've had have been where at the end, the leader says, wow, I realized that I was not giving you enough time to ask me questions about what my vision was and what my expectations were. Or I realized that I'm not leveraging the strengths of this team in the right way, because I wasn't taking the time to understand each of your needs and each of your perspectives. And that makes it really powerful.
And then the team is really going to feel heard, and that's going to really boost engagement of the team, especially if the leader then continues to act on that, right? So So,
but a lot of our work comes from other facilitators and consultants or coaches who are saying, I'm doing this program with a group and we've done A, B, and C. Do you have an activity that would complement this and then would set them up for this next piece of our program? And that's what we love, because then we don't have to do the work of discovering the team's needs. We have somebody who's already done that work, and we can just craft one or a series of game experiences that will just complement the other content and bring it to life, and then get the team where they need to go for the next stage of their evolution.
Well, that's a great way to work. So then you're really playing to your strengths as a company.
Yeah. And it's one of the most exciting things since we started since even before Barometer was a company and it was just us playing around with the idea of games, is we would create a game and show it to other professionals in this space, and they'd say, oh, wow, yeah, I can see how this game is really great for practicing giving and receiving feedback. But in my work, I could see it be really helpful for DEI purposes, or this game that is useful at groups practicing different ways of looking at complex problems is actually going to be really helpful in helping with role clarity. And so seeing the use cases that my partners and I could come up with were only limited to our brains and our experience, but other people could use them really differently. That helped us think about, how do we create this as a product that other people can use and plug into their work for whatever outcomes they're looking to accomplish. And that's really exciting, to be able to create something that somebody else is going to take to new ends.
And use it in a different environment. Wow. I think that's really cool though, also, Alex, that you are willing to do that, so here's the thing, that the game that we made, and if you use it over here, did people come back and tell you how they used it? And
yeah, and what we're building now, we're building a web platform that will have the games, all the facilitation materials. But the piece that I'm most excited about is a community of practice where people can share, I use this game for this type of situation. Here were the discussion questions I used. It was really great. And then we have this library of different experiences and different ideas. And maybe people can find partners and collaborators for future engagements that combine different areas of expertise. So we want to create this community of people that are using games and simulations for experiential learning and growing the field with us.
Wow. My mind is just buzzing with how useful this can be for people who are working, as many of the lean and continuous improvement consultants are working with organizations to change culture. And what a great resource. Wow.
Yeah.
So you're sounds like it's just the two of you though. It's a small
there's
group, but
three of us. There's three
Oh,
co-founders.
okay, tripled.
So we're massive. And we have a fractional marketing person who works with us, and we have several other facilitators and consultants that we partner with us and that advise us on different topics. But we're a very small team right now, and we're all wearing a lot of hats. We're all moving in a lot of different paths, but it's very exciting.
It does sound really, really exciting. So thinking about kind of like the pathway that you've come, Alex, tell me, well, first of all, before I ask you that question, tell us how you can find you and find your website.
Yeah, so the company is called Barometer XP. Our website is www.barometerxp.com. The XP is for experience. I get asked that a lot. People also ask, why barometer? And barometers measure pressure, and we see different team dynamics as pressure. And there can be good pressure, there can be bad pressure, there's neutral pressure. But it's, how are you balancing all of these different perspectives and these different needs? So that's why barometer. I'm on LinkedIn, just Alexandra Suchman, or put in Barometer XP and you'll find me. I think those are the big ways. My email is alex@barometerxp.com. I love talking about this. I could talk about this all day. If anyone's interested in learning more, or partnering with us, or checking out our games, please get in touch with me.
That sounds great. Thank you. So think about the path that you followed, which you started out, in public policy, right? Right. And where you are today. So, I mean, which is quite an unusual path. So what would be your one piece of advice to a young person starting out?
Be curious. Be curious. Think outside of your immediate responsibilities. If there's something that's interesting to you about what somebody else is doing, or you read about something that you think connects to your work in some way, explore that. Go beyond your immediate world, and you never know where those interests will take you, or who you're going to meet and how those people will change your life. When my partner Peter, I was telling somebody I want to bring more learning activities into both my consulting and my workshops, and I said, oh, you should meet this guy I know, he creates games. Had a random phone call with a random guy. I remember I was working at a library that day and was standing in the little vestibule by the doorway during our conversation. little did I know that person would be my business partner. And, so now we're sort of legally bound to each other for a long period of time. But you just never know where exploring different interests will take you. And don't be afraid to change your path. You don't have to stick with any one decision. Curiosity will take you to all kinds of places if you're just open to it.
I love that. That's really great advice. Thank you. Alex Suchman, thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of Lean.
It was an absolute delight. I will do this anytime.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Alex Suchman for being my guest on The Edges of Lean. What did you learn from this conversation? What ideas did it spark, and what games are you going to play? We would love to hear from you. Find Alex at barometerxp.com or email her at alex@barometerxp.com or find her on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com and comment wherever you watch or listen. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and tell a friend about The Edges of Lean. Please join me in exploring more of The Edges of Lean. There's a lot to learn. And check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbach with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.